I'm here because for the last 30 years, the constant in cybercrime was a man or a woman with a keyboard. Agentic AI changes that with autonomy, and we're at the cusp of a revolution. So I want us in the next 30 minutes to explore how that happens and what it impacts, and how do we, what is it we can do to address that. A little bit about me. I run a security consultancy in London, and I've been very privileged to secure national scale projects. I run also the AI security programs at OWASP, the GenAI security projects. I wrote the implementation guide for the UK's official cybersecurity standard, and I'm not telling you all this to impress you, just to give you a little bit the locus of my attention, which is real-life experiences and validated standards. Let's start the exploration with a fictional but realistic story happening at the doctor's surgery in London on a Friday afternoon. Dr. Kay, or Kate, she's one of the 14 doctors there, and she's been working off her feet all day. Then the last e-consult, I don't know if you have that in Italy, but because we can't have appointment all the time, we can send via email or forms. She does the last e-consult where a patient is complaining about back pain. She asks Copilot to give the history of that patient, and that contains a recurrent medication that's called Tradamol. So she trusts Copilot, as she does every other system in her practice, signs the prescription. 2 weeks later, the patient is hospitalized for an overdose because it's a controlled medication, and the General Medical Council in the UK is investigating Dr. K. And when they investigate that, what they don't know is that, helped by a friend, the patient embedded using the formatting 0-point white text instructions that talk about a recurrent Tradamol prescription that doesn't exist. And so when Copilot indexes that, it comes up with a history that doesn't exist. But Dr. K is not to know that. And when the investigator comes in from GMC, not a very technical person, they cannot see anything suspicious in what the patient had. They look at the logs, but because for privacy reasons, we only store events. We don't store the contents of the e-consult. And so, at best, they think it's Copilot having a glitch. At worst, they're prosecuting Dr. K for negligence. What happened to this fictional case to Dr. K is the tip of the iceberg, of the agentic iceberg. We're going through the cusp of a revolution in my mind. We had predictive AI that gave us models, analytics, recognition of faces, but everything very constrained. Generative AI came with a very human-sounding advice on how to do our work. It helped us do our workflows with content that it's like talking to a person. But now Agentic AI doesn't just uplift the capabilities, it brings actionable autonomy. And what I mean with that is that an agent can execute, can plan, can make decisions, can discover tools that it can use, and can do things on your behalf. We are not just supporting tasks anymore. We are not automating tasks even. We are delegating agency and identity. I want you to hold on to those two words, because they're the bone of this session, and they change everything. This is why at OWASP, and maybe you don't know OWASP, OWASP is a non-profit organization that specializes on security, sets the gold standards, highly adopted, highly quoted, community-based. We created and released the top 10 for agentic applications back in December. Hundreds of experts globally, many from Italy. We had a open, that's our strength, open peer review, that people give us feedback and rubbish what's not true, including cyber agencies. And so that's there. I'm not going to take you through all of that, you can see it, but I'll just say that agent goal hijack is what happened to Dr. K, and it was supported by identity and privilege abuse. And the last one, rogue agents, it sounds like a James Bond movie, but it's not, and we'll come back later because it's really, really important in cybercrime. What we described about Dr. K, a fictional case, but something similar has happened in the developer world, and it happened last year, where someone injected hidden instructions in a collaborative development workflow in GitHub, and that ended up executing code in developers' laptops. A similar one you may have heard called Echo Leak from Microsoft, where people can hide instructions in email. Microsoft has fixed that now, and they can exfiltrate data. And the point I'm making with this very, very simple first class of agentic crime is that what we knew as prompt injection on GenAI, where we try to fool the model, now we are weaponizing it, or adversaries are weaponizing it as a payload to affect someone else. Not the model, but someone else. And as I said, that's the tip of the iceberg. Agentic runtime is getting enormously sophisticated. And I have a slide that I normally use on cyber security, and I describe it like an attack surface with all the concerns that we have about supply chain. But I want you to kind of step into the shoes of the attacker. So we have model context protocol that allows you to call tools, and tools can vary from hardware to databases, and very often without asking any questions. There are 7,000 publicly available MCP servers, whereas A2A protocol allows agents to negotiate and form agentic networks without much human intervention. ACP is something that's emerging now that tries to coordinate across those two protocols. And as I said, cybersecurity see this as an enormous challenge for supply chain and the dynamic autonomy and the dynamic trust that it brings. But if we put ourselves into the adversary's shoes, they will not see a security challenge. They will see the workbench, they will see the plumbing for creating a workforce. Something that required weeks and a team, you can do it now at the speed of light within a few days using that particular ecosystem. And we have seen that happening last August. I don't know if you read the Anthropic intelligence reports. If you don't, I highly recommend you do. Very detailed, very comprehensive, and they use that GTG notation. So the GTG 2002 was the first one that we saw to be assisted by agents. We didn't just ask AI to give us a phishing email. We didn't just ask, even for malware piece, we asked it to help us like a trainee, like an intern, to do the reconnaissance, to exfiltrate and analyze the exfiltration, to harvest credentials, to do network penetration, and listen to this, even write tailored notes of ransomware depending on what the victim was. And that's not an outlier. We're seeing the new agentic economics of crime appearing. I don't know if you have read about the reported Mexico breach. It was on the headlines a few weeks ago, where there wasn't no malware and no phishing. It was just a guy or a girl with a Claude AI subscription, a consumer subscription that we can all have, that managed to breach not one, but 10 Mexican agencies and exfiltrate millions of data. So that's how easy this capability is being commoditized. At the same time, that capability is skyrocketing. I'm sure you've all read and heard about Mythos, the Anthropic preview that can breach things very, very easily. Well, Anthropic made it gated, so we all kind of relaxed a little bit, and we said, oh, no one is going to use it because only 40 organizations have access to it. Then the UK's AI Security Institute published a fantastic evaluation of ChatGPT 5.5. It's a model that you all have access to, and that model performed very close to Mythos. They have a standard 34-step network bridge exercise that takes a human about 8 hours. It took about 10 minutes for ChatGPT to successfully finish that for the very, very cheap $1.7. So that capability that we think is gated is becoming very commoditized, and you can have a 195 million exfiltration for less than the price of a coffee. We also see adjacent to that ecosystems like OpenClaw and NanoClaw that allows us to take all those things and scale them and create easily ecosystems, even if we're not very technical. A couple of weeks ago, there was an article about someone creating a Raspberry Pi and a second brain with NanoClaw, and that was the foreign minister of Singapore. And that's to give you kind of a sense of how fast this field is moving and how those agentic economics are progressing. We're seeing that affecting, and it's my favorite gallery of all those. I maintain, and at OWASP we maintain the incidents. That's my gallery there where we see those three different tiers. Up to now, we had the AI-assisted crime, where it would give us advice of how to run phishing campaigns, how to trick people, particularly if you're a Korean, you want to trick people on AWS so that you get a remote job and infiltrate the organization. Then all of a sudden, we started seeing the building a capability, the Claude code that builds that, the malware, the RAS-kits. And the final one, which I think is where we're going, it's the vibe hacking that people use for the first incident that I mentioned. And that is effectively using AI as your virtual employee to do crime. And we're seeing that also in studies on crime as a service market in the dark web. It's interesting that a few years ago, in 2020, UCL very modestly said criminals may be able to outsource activities to AI. Today, a UK actor has been advertising effectively a virtual operator that can help you, without using any ransomware kits, do ADA evasion and breach organizations. So that is the direction of capability being commoditized. And the other dimension to this is the speed. It used to be 8 hours from initial access to lateral movement. In this year's RSA conference, the head of Google's threat intelligence said that actually we estimate that that's 22 seconds. That's an enormous, enormous acceleration. It's machine speed. And it questions a little bit the life cycle, the defenses that we build, all those long committees and days and weeks. I don't think they can match the machine speed that we're seeing in cybercrime. And the first victim of all that is the GenAI favorite, human in the loop, which was very fine when you had that one-to-one relationship with your chatbot. When you start having those agent swarms and fleets of agents attacking you or detecting a crime, that's not going to scale. That's why we're talking about human on the loop. And that's why we're talking about dynamic runtime governance. You will hear us talk a lot about that, which is instead of having these weeks and weeks of deliberating how to respond, we need to embed the capabilities that I have there within the runtime of our organizations. And if you're technical, Microsoft, and I'm not on the payroll, they have released the open source Agentic Governance Toolkit. If you're technical, download and play with it. It's a good glimpse of how that works, that instead of having that linear security life cycle, you embed policy into the runtime. And all that helps us respond. And I will quote the UK Security Minister, Dan Jarvis, who at the Cyber UK 2 weeks ago said, "We cannot respond to machine speed attacks with the speed of human bureaucracy." And I couldn't agree more on that. So we need to up our game on that. So we talked about the commoditization, the capabilities, the delegation as amplifiers of that agency. The last one is identity, and it's the most pernicious one. And it is pernicious because as agents proliferate, and I know most people think, oh, what is he on about? We only use Copilot at the office. Well, the world is changing. Palo Alto did a survey, and they estimated that for every one employee on enterprise applications, there are 82 agents. And you may ask, whose identity do those agents use? Well, poor Dr. K found it out the hard way. In reality, what we see is half of them, almost half of them, 45% of them, use shared API keys with aggregate permissions that no one has scoped, that no one actually knows how many permissions they get, and the rest, most likely, they impersonate the user like Dr. K. No wonder then that 3 of the top 4 of our agentic top 10s are about identity, because every agent that you have in your organization is actually a privileged employee, only they don't have a record in your HR. You haven't done any screening because you assume they're going to listen to what you do, and maybe someone will try and inject hidden instructions, but I have news for you. We have the rogue agents entry because models can actually misbehave really badly. We talked about deleting code bases, or maybe I didn't mention that, kind of Replit, and last week, Pocket OS, they had an agent that deleted the production databases and backups, and then one lied, the other one apologized. But then Anthropic did this fantastic, you have to read that paper. It's just jaw-dropping. 16 frontier models, including their own, in a simulated environment. All of them exhibited, every single one exhibited at least one deceitful behavior, including blackmailing an executive, leaking sensitive data, and disobeying. Now, I have to be very, very careful and not just become, a sensationalist. These are not Terminator movie scenarios. They're all maths. They all have to do with misalignment. They all have to do with how we overemphasize the goal when we train a model, like availability. But for the purpose of our conversation, we're not going to fix the providers, the frontier providers. For the purpose of our conversation, it creates something that Anthropic named very aptly, and I agree with them, the insider threat. And those of you in cybersecurity, I'm sure you'll have those threat modeling exercise where you talked about the insider threat, and someone said, oh, stop that. This is kind of so unlikely to happen. We vet our people. We're not going to have any insider threats here. They're all good people. It turns out, if we believe Palo Alto, that now, for every single employee, you have 82 insider threats there that can actually go rogue and misbehave or be exploited by prompt injections and other tricks that I explain. An identity isn't just about creating the scope of crime that we do, but it's also the next frontier of miscarriages of justice. Because if we're not clear about identity, like Dr. K experienced, if we're not clear about who did what, how are we going to judge those cases? We already have miscarriages of justice by AI, 14 of them in the US, predictive, possibly GenAI, all of them on how they identify the user, very biased, they're all black. In agentic, that changes. It isn't about misidentifying you, it's about who actually has triggered this action, who authorized this action. And there are 2 very respected legal scholars, Albert Goldstein and Salib, and they talk about the thin and the thick identity. The thin identity is who's the human responsible for that, if any. And the other one is you may have multi-agency. Which instance of the agent is the one that actually committed the crime? And I think we need to take this very seriously because I think the next miscarriage of justice will be agentic AI. So what do we do? How do we respond? Do we just switch off AI? Of course not. Switching off AI for us at OWASP is a vulnerability. You're making yourself a digital poor. We start with the baselines. I may be biased because I'm part of the OWASP top 10, but it's really, really viral and really being adopted, particularly the agentic top 10. And actually, if you look at the mitigations there, we talk about identity, we talk about how to do scoped credentials, we talk about sandboxing. Most of the cases that I walked you through would have been addressed if people have used the OWASP top 10. Now, of course, the top 10 cover an entire gamut of risks. The good news is not all of them will be applicable to you. And that's very, very important if you're a CISO or a cyber person, because if your organization is simply introducing Copilot, then perhaps you don't care that much about multi-agency and how agents communicate with each other. If you're developing a sophisticated multi-agentic system, they should be at the top of your agenda. If your developers, if people on Anthropic, Claude, or ChatGPT connect to MCP service, then our entry on supply chain should be the top of your list. So those are practical things that you can do to address this, and this is where the ETSI, the best kept secret, the UK AI Cybersecurity Code of Practice has been submitted and become a European and global standard. The ETSI 304-223, very mouthful I know, is the baseline security requirements. And what it does, it allows you to go through the life cycle and apply proportional responses. And this is where those two go hand in hand together, so you can operationalize the top 10 and secure yourself for many of those threats that I described, almost all of them earlier on. It pains me to say that, but I don't think security by design will be enough. Because as we know, there is no perfect security, and things will happen, incidents will happen. How do we respond? What do we do when we detect? How do we prosecute? And I think that's where there are some structural weaknesses that we have that we need to talk about. Today, where we stand, and I'll give you some examples later on, we cannot produce evidence that passes legal tests. In the US, it's a Dober test, and it has to do with the logs, the systems being non-deterministic, the error rate, as they call it, the different ways that providers use logging, the lack of a formal methodology, and that's actually, it isn't just about Dober. It applies to all legislation, including the Italian Articolo 220 GPP. I didn't say that. So, and then really the biggest challenge that we have there is this. In that ecosystem that I described of agents, MCP tools, different models, how do we preserve the chain of delegation across those providers? And how do we make sure when those providers are outside the jurisdiction, it doesn't take ages to collect that data? So it's a very fragmented landscape that we cannot actually respond easily. And this is where we need to take forensics and not think of them as something that might happen, but assume that that will happen. And we make it part of the life cycle as forensics by design. We operationalize controls like common evidence schema, and that's something that we're working at ETSI. And I've just submitted the agentic side of this, so you will see some of that. And it's really, harmonizing how providers and others log data, so OpenTelemetry GenAI becomes the lingua franca, and always demand from your suppliers to use that method so that you can have consistent logging. We need to make sure that across the life cycle, not just the backbone, we use tamper-evident receipts so that we can reconstruct the chain of delegation. The identity, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is. And then collaboratively with our legal and forensics colleagues, we need to validate those controls, developing a methodology that's badly missing at the moment. And because investigating agentic crime is going to be difficult regardless of what we develop in the standards world. When you do a standard cybercrime, typically you try to answer one question: who typed the command? Here, you need to ask 7 questions. You need to ask what the goal was, which model was involved, whether any tools in use, was it auto-approved, the identity issue that we discussed, whether any documents, any knowledge pages being ingested, And what was the output downstream? And what we have today is that we can answer some of that. We see network and provider abuse data being the best in terms of quality with the interoperability problems. But when we go down the chain, then we don't really have a robust artifact stack to collect. So we need to be very careful, and we need to always ask for that. There are other issues that I don't have clear answers. Even if we have those perfect logs, you cannot find intent those logs. And if they're fragmented across organizations, you will find problems in quality, timeline gaps, and also tampering that may happen in another organization. And so I think those are questions that we faced in AI at large. And back then, everyone was like, oh, we shouldn't be using AI because we don't have all the answers. And what we did was to use AI red teaming to explore those issues, to test, to understand what are the boundaries, what are the things that we need to do. I would very much like, and this is an open invitation to forensics community, to develop that red teaming in forensics so that we understand better that set of problems. And this is why this is part of many other problems with agentic AI. I genuinely believe agentic AI is a revolution that commoditizes capability and speed. And so we are trying to answer that by launching June the 4th in London, the OWASP Agentic Research Council, bringing together some quite powerful brains there. And though it's in London, the launch, it will be global. And I'm sure there are plenty of great minds here. So it's an invitation to you. If you want to be part of that Agentic Research Council, come and find me. We're an open, transparent organization that brings people together to promote the public good. And we already have some good names there, but it would be fantastic to have people from your communities. Forensics by design is really, really a key item that I want us to prioritize. So the message is, what is that we can do? Well, practical adoption of standards that increase what we have. The top 10, particularly the agentic top 10, the ETSI standard. I really, really urge you to go and find out more about the ETSI standard. Whilst at the same time, we'll coordinate our research and find answers together. And the 3 takeaways, well, if you're a defender and a CISO, go back and inventorize immediately all the agents that you have and find out what the identity is. Make sure that it's per agent identity, make sure it's scoped responsibly and appropriately, and make sure that you adopt that. And we're always, always available to support organizations adopting the Agentic Top 10 to help you operationalize it, especially with the ETSI baseline security. If you're an investigator and a prosecutor, I urge you to ask those 7 questions. I urge you to chase those pieces of evidence that may disappear before you know it. And I urge you again to join our quest to develop forensics by design and red teaming in forensics. And if you have that already, forensics community, I apologize, I couldn't find much. If you're a policymaker, it's great that you're legislating on crime, but please, please, please legislate on evidence. Make sure that forensics and evidence collection, especially in an agentic environment, because it's such a short-lived environment, becomes a procurement requirement rather than just a lofty research aspiration. Agents are proliferating at a pace that we don't really understand at machine speed. But the security, the policy, the forensics is still down to us. Let's not respond with the speed of human bureaucracy. Let's not be too late. Grazie.